Food became such a precious possession that we didn't have it. And there were times she had to go stand in line to get the ration of bread that she would receive. And one time she told us she came back that she had received her bread and was just leaving when somebody that was really starving ran up to her and stole her bread. And that was all she had to feed Lila and I. I can't imagine at this stage in my life as a mother and a grandmother when children tell you they're hungry and they want to eat and you have nothing to give them. It's very hard for me to understand how she did it.
There were almost 500,000 Jewish people in the Warsaw Ghetto, and a quarter of them died of starvation.
Well, I know exactly how they felt, because as we lived in the Warsaw Ghetto and as it was progressively getting worse and worse, the atrocities in the streets were horrendous. I mean, you could look out the window and you would see dead bodies in the street. You would see a wagon picking up all these corpses and trying to clean up. The worst thing that I remember is that seeing people that just dropped in the street, they were dead, but because maybe they had a sock or a shoe or a pair of pants or some kind of clothing on, somebody that would be passing by and would see these articles of just a dead body, he doesn't need it any longer, and they would cover up the body with a newspaper and take whatever possession this poor soul had.
Clothing.
Anything. And to this day, I mean, the worst thing I can see is somebody putting a newspaper over themselves, because it just brings back that memory. And this is what we saw, and people and children were starving. The ghetto was like very scary. People always rushing, bombs falling in the sky. The sky would light up all of a sudden like it was just like lightning all over the sky. And people used to run. They used to run and hide wherever they could. And you just had to be prepared to run. Once the bombs started falling, you never know what was going to hit you on your head or whatever. So you had to kind of get low and hide. Mm-hmm. And we were hiding out. We were just running. We were just running from place to place with my parents, trying to find the right hiding place. And I passed out because of the shock that he came back. It was 2 years that we were separated. So by this time, my sister and I were, like the rest of the population, emaciated from hunger. And we're to the point of just sitting around in the bed and not really moving a lot because of weakness. And I remember my father saying that when he saw us, he was afraid to touch us. And he was afraid to touch us because we looked so frail. And he brought us back to life because he brought with him bread, butter, and he cut up the bread into little cubicles. And he fed us a little bit at a time, knowing full well that if he gave us too much food and our stomachs were no longer used to it, that we would become ill. So that's the reason why when I say what happened to us, I say that I wouldn't be sitting here telling this story if he hadn't come back, that my mother and my sister and I would have perished as everyone else did.
I remember he came in and my mother opened the front door, and I remember she fainted. She couldn't believe that he came back, because nobody usually comes back from something like that. And he came in, and she was telling me, "That's my father." I said, "Who is that man?" She says, "That's your father." I said, "No, it's not," because I didn't remember him. I was so young when he left that I did not recognize him or remember him. She says, "Yes, this is your father." And I kept telling her I don't know that man. And she tried to persuade me that it was. And then he started giving us some things he had brought with him, like candy, chocolate, bread, jelly, all kinds of things that he hid inside his clothes because he knew we needed food. And after a while, he, with all these things that he gave us, not having that had him before, little by little, I got to believe my mother that this is my father, which it was.
And he gave you only small portions of the food because he was fearful it might be too much.
From what my mother has said, he cut up little bitty pieces to give us so that we wouldn't overeat. Because, when you overeat and you haven't eaten for a long time, you can get very sick. And we were undernourished. It was very obvious from looking at us, he could tell that we didn't have much food. So little by little, we tried to get our strength back, because we didn't do anything, no activities or anything, just sitting around, not being able to go anywhere and not being able to have enough to eat. After a while, you just sit there, nothing else you can do. But he tried to get us back on our feet and get us back to feeling like we're human, even though we couldn't go anywhere, do anything, or play with anything, didn't have toys, didn't have anything to do. He wanted us to look more healthy than we did, and he managed to do that.
Well, it was like my mother called it, the vegetable bin. A chest that would hold things on top. You lifted the top, and you would store things in it. And so my father put old rags and old newspapers and on the top. So if you lifted it, didn't look very nice. You wouldn't want to go through it. But underneath, he had built two little benches, or two little seats, and a potty. And when they went to work, they left with us whatever they had, some water and whatever bread they had. And they would put us into this piece of furniture and put it against the wall and go to work. If you ask me today, how did we do this? It's very hard for me to explain it, because having grandchildren, it's not that easy to keep children quiet. But it was a different time and place. Children in Europe were supposed to be seen and not heard. And as my mother later on in life tried to explain, she told everyone that she had two very obedient daughters. And I think we knew. We grew up very fast and realized this was a matter of life and death, that we had to be quiet, that we couldn't talk when just any time we wanted to. Once we were in there, we had to be quiet. There were times that, because when everybody went to work, when all the older people or able people had to go to work, and the Germans would come through the building, and you could hear them walking up the stairs. And they came into the room. You could hear them talking, and yet we weren't found. I always think back, had they brought with them the German dogs, shepherds, of course we would have been found. but somebody was looking over us, and they didn't. And my parents would come back, and of course, at night, we'd be out with them in the room. But there were many things that you just cannot explain, that for some reason, I think the Almighty was looking over us.
Well, he made this a vegetable bin that had, I thought it was like old vegetables, onions and carrots and potatoes on the top. And it was empty in the back. And my sister Ann and I used to hide back there during the day when they went to work. And we used to sit there, and they were gone 5 or 6 hours at a time, at least. We would just sit in the back, and if we heard we used to run back then when we heard noises coming up the steps. The Germans used to come with their boots, you know how they walk, and with their dog sniffing, and we heard footsteps. We used to run in there real quick and used to hide and keep quiet. And we were just trained to do that. So that's how we survived during the day.
Did they ever open the bin?
I think, if I recall correctly, they did come up there, but they never found us because we were just real quiet. We were just trained to be very quiet.
You and your sister looking at one another?
That's it. It was
speaking not a word?
Not a word. Everywhere we hid, we couldn't talk because you couldn't be heard. If anybody heard voices, they would be suspicious. So we couldn't be heard until everything was gone and quiet. So that's the way we had to survive during the day. Now, when my daddy went to work in this factory, he built under the floor. He built like a false piece of flooring, false bottom, and there was a hole under there that went into the basement. And we used to go and hide in there. So my mother and daddy they were there during the day working in this factory. And we would hide in there, and so they could watch us a little bit better because they were right there with us.
And one time the Germans came with a dog when you were hiding in that false basement.
Yeah, they came in with the dogs, but somehow they didn't find us. It's a miracle. They didn't.
The dog could smell you?
They could smell us, but we were hiding someplace where they couldn't get to us. So it's my miracle that we're here. There were lots of experiences like that, very close calls, that if it wouldn't have been thought of thoroughly the way my daddy thought of to hide us, we wouldn't be able to make it.
He was always a step ahead.
Yeah, always a step ahead.
Your mother too?
My mother was always thinking of tomorrow. And that's what you had to do. I mean, you think about today, but then you say, well, if it works today, what am I going to do tomorrow? I can't stay here again because it's not safe. So you have to think up of other ways to, some other place to hide. And that's how we went from day to day.